All right, everybody, welcome to BO Boys for Sunday, February 26th. F it, it's a raw feed. We're doing it live. I'm Clayton.
Yeah, I'm Pat. And Clayton, this was a gigantic weekend at the box office. Historic drops, overperforming bears. Jesus has risen in the box office rankings, and we couldn't do this alone. So we brought in the heaviest hitter there is, box office legend, formerly of Forbes. Now he's at the Wrap. And most importantly, he's on the new episode of the BO Boys. Give it up for Scott Mendelson as he are.
Yes.
Always a pleasure. Thanks for having me back.
Well, thanks for joining us, Scott. So, we were talking briefly off mic about what a huge weekend this is, and I think we should start. We're gonna get to the bear that everyone loves. That's number one, but I think we got to start with this drop, this historic drop. So, Ant-Man and the Wasp in Quantumania. Big opening last weekend. It got over 100 for the 3 day, and everyone seemed okay, weathered the storm, bad reviews, B cinema score, but it made the 100 million in the opening weekend 3 day. But now it has had, what was this, a 69% drop? Is that what we're landing at? Scott,
Between 69 and 70%. We'll see what the final numbers are tomorrow.
all right. I mean,
Offhand, it is I believe it's the second, or again, depending on where it lands in the 69 percentile, it's going to be the second or third biggest drop ever for a $100 million opener. Over under Batman v Superman, which dropped 69 and change from $166 million opening weekend, and Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2, which dropped 72% from a then record $169 million opening weekend. That was obviously a for the fans, heavily front loaded, blah, 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 but it still did great. It ended up with 381 domestic and 1.3 billion worldwide, which at the time was the third biggest global gross ever, behind James Cameron #1 and James Cameron #2. This one again, it's on two big takeaways for me anyway. A, audiences did not like it any better than critics did. There's the whole critics are out of touch, and audiences are fine with it, blah blah blah. This is clearly not the case. The film got a B from CinemaScore, and I would say the numbers, while CinemaScore is, I would argue, the best, most accurate reading of what regular people think about a given movie, because it's not an opt-in poll. You actually have to go to the theater, watch the movie, and then get tagged by somebody who's polling people outside the theater. So it's not something you can all get your friends and run up the numbers on IMDb or Rotten Tomatoes user whatever's.
mhm.
I do think to a certain extent that even that B was probably buffered a little bit by the kind of hardcore fans that race out on opening night, and the kind of fans that make sure to vote in a Rotten Tomatoes user poll to get it up to 83% on Rotten Tomatoes user polls.
Yeah.
Um, and so again, I think the general audience consensus was that this wasn't that good.
Mm.
And as far as the one thing I think also in relation to the big drop is that we've seen this two previous times where you had a Marvel film that was either sold as or presumed to be a major mythology episode with big twists and shocking status quo changes and all of that jazz. Captain America Civil War had a $179 million opening weekend, almost double Captain America the Winter Soldier. And then you had Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, which made 187 an opening weekend, which I think is more than double. Yeah, more than double the $88, $85 million opening weekend of Doctor Strange in 2016. And part of that is because you had people that took them as sort of Avengers 2.5 or Avengers 4.1, whatever you want to call it. And then that audience checked it off their bingo cards. And then for the rest of the run, you were dealing with people that were just happy to get a halfway decent Captain America 3 or a halfway decent Doctor Strange 2.
Mhm.
But with this film, you're dealing with, okay, I would argue, and I think critical word and word of mouth would back me up on this, it's not a very satisfying Ant-Man 3. So
Hmm.
what you're seeing is, the diehard showed up and they sort of buffeted the opening weekend bigger than you would have gotten if it was just the third Ant-Man. Because this is, 105. The last Ant-Man did 75 million on opening weekend. But once that audience goes bye-bye, you're left with the people that, does this film work as a third Ant-Man movie slash standalone MCU superhero adventure? And I would argue from the reviews and the word of mouth and the drop internationally and worldwide, the answer is no. Now, if you factor, assuming it as a normal rate of descent from this point forward, it's probably going to do about 235 domestic, 525 worldwide, which is about on
Mhm.
par with the first two Ant-Man films, give or take inflation. Also, when you factor in that this film is going to do about 40 million in China versus 125 for the last Ant-Man, the drop, the lack of income in China is almost going to make the difference between Ant-Man 2 and Ant-Man 3.
Mhm. Mhm.
And we saw that before with Thor: Love and Thunder, which, if you take out China and Russia, made more money globally than Thor Ragnarok. But when
Mhm.
you add in China and Russia, it made less money than Thor Ragnarok.
Mhm.
So there's
Mhm.
a certain amount of nuance and context there. Same thing with Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. It's disappointing because it didn't do $1 billion. It did 955. You throw in China and Russia by pre-COVID standards, and you have a $1.1 billion grosser.
Mhm. So,
Mhm.
Um, yeah, go
well, I
ahead.
was gonna say, do you see though that this big second weekend drop plus the bad reviews plus the low audience score that, like you said, maybe was even bolstered by the super fans wanting to advocate for it, plus the fact that, now a couple of years past Endgame, the whole superhero thing, especially the Marvel thing, is probably not nearly as cool, at least as it was a few years ago. It is not the epicenter of pop culture the way it was heading into Endgame. You take all those factors. I mean, is there a chance there's a less rosy future for these next few weeks of Quantumania? I mean, this.
Yes. I mean, yeah. I mean, it either, when you look at a drop like this, it either holds out like Harry Potter and makes it to, I don't know, 230 or whatever, or it just keeps dropping
Mhm.
and struggles to top 200 million domestic.
Mm.
That seems slightly unlikely because there's just not a lot of kid stuff between now and Shazam in 3.5 weeks.
Mm.
Creed will play to slightly older kids and their parents.
Mhm.
Scream 6 is an R-rated movie. John Wick is an R-rated movie. That's right after Shazam.
Mhm.
And then after that, John Wick is an R-rated movie. And then Dungeons and Dragons in the 31st, which Paramount is hoping is going to be the next Jumanji: Welcome to the Jungle, relatively speaking.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, so now, what might also happen is, there's plenty of Marvel films that have dropped like a rock on weekend two and then recovered because they were the only game in town for kid stuff.
Mm.
Spider-Man: Homecoming, Ant-Man and the Wasp, Thor: Love and Thunder. I didn't like Thor: Love and Thunder, but it legged out okay.
Mhm.
I mean, I think again that might be a situation where the critics liked it a little bit less than the paying audiences, and fine, whatever, that's fine. The thing I always like to make a point to remind people when we're having this critics versus audience discourse is that, back in the olden days, nobody expected movies like Jurassic Park 6 or Minions 2 or, Doctor Strange 2 or whatever to get good
Right.
reviews. 3 stars was a triumph for that kind of movie.
Right.
Nobody was screaming about the cultural, discord because audiences or critics didn't love Batman Forever.
Right. Right. Right.
It
Right.
just that's because you had films playing for adults that were mainstream pictures. You had films that were prestigious and acclaimed, but were still mainstream enough to make their money. Um,
Right.
the example I always throw out, and I probably done it on this show, so I apologize, is that in early 1990 you had a situation where, stereotypically speaking, men and boys or men went to see The Hunt for October, women went to see Pretty Women, and kids went to see Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Mm.
30 years later, everybody sees Ninja Turtles, and there's nobody shows up in theaters for Pretty Woman and Hunt for October.
Right. 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 Right.
Um,
Yeah, there's something
so
about though that first 10 years of Marvel, because listen, this movie, Paul Rudd, who we all love, but who's never been a movie star, playing a guy
Mhm.
who could turn himself into an ant. This movie making 200 million plus domestic, 300 million. It's a success, obviously, but I think the issue is we're judging these new batch of Marvel movies versus the first 10 years of Marvel, which is the most successful long-term movie project in the history of the medium. So I think that is where now they have the danger of this narrative forming that the bloom is off the rose because the new batch of movies hasn't been as well received, and Quantumania could be their, their Snyder Batman movies. This could be the, who's the director of this again? Not Ruben Fletcher.
Peyton Reed.
Peyton
Peyton
Reed.
Reed. Peyton Reed. You don't want Peyton Reed to become their Zack Snyder.
Well, he can just go back to making movies for adults.
Mhm.
Um,
Down
or
with love
whatever. I
too.
mean,
Let's do it.
it's and again, I'm leery to blame any one artistic person
Of
in terms
course.
of what went wrong. Because I mean, I do think it was a terrible idea beforehand, and especially a terrible idea now
Mhm.
to sell the film as a mythology episode. The
Mm.
witness the beginning of a new dynasty,
Mhm.
which Marvel never had to do that before. That's what their competitors did. That's what the copycats did.
Mm.
The
Mhm.
Mummy, see the beginning of a new dark universe of gods and monsters.
Right.
The Dark Tower, the first in a Stephen King cinematic universe involving books we mostly don't own the rights to. But shh, don't tell anyone that. Or Transformers: The Last Night. This one's not just a Transformers sequel; it's a start of a cinematic universe. And every time that backfired, every time.
Mhm.
And I am astonished that Marvel/Disney went that route, emphasizing the extent to which this would be a big mythology episode, and this would be the start of the big new phase, and all of that nonsense. Because that's part of why expectations were higher than they might have been if it was just sold as a third Ant-Man movie.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah, I think the
Um,
problem with the Marvel stuff is that the things that were the garnish have become the main meal, right? And that
I
is not a way to create movies that people will go back and see several times, because if it's all parsley, then people that's not a salad. That's not a meal. You know
yes.
what I mean?
Um, I think 9 times out of 10, Marvel does not sell it that way. I think Marvel and Disney are well aware that people on the internet tend to sell, to write about how, it's all about the internet connectivity and the cameos and the Easter eggs, and that's why people love these movies, and that's never been true.
Mhm.
But as long as they were making money, Disney and Marvel could just stand back and let the internet do its thing because that's just free publicity. Why stop it? But this time, they actually were the ones that put that narrative out there. Quite foolishly, I would argue.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, and again, I'm loath to blame the marketing because 9 times out of 10, they're the shoot the messenger situation. Um, but I now they're in a weird situation where the launch pad for Phase 5, which was the maiden voyage of their big new big bad, is kind of a flop and not a well liked flop. So
Mhm.
now they have to basically get out in front and basically say what was always the subtext, which is like, look, these you don't have to see all of these to enjoy the next one. These are supposed to be standalone, user-friendly pictures. Don't worry if you didn't like Ant-Man and the Quantumania. Don't worry, you guys will still enjoy Avengers: The Kang Dynasty. We promise. And they're in a weird position now where they have to come out and sort of say the quiet part out loud, which
Mm.
they've never had to do.
Right.
And I
Right.
would argue again,
It,
if they hadn't tried to sell it as this big mythology episode, they wouldn't be in that position. Because even, again, Captain America Civil War, yes, there are big picture stuff there, but at the end of the day, it's still a Captain America movie co-starring Iron Man. I think even Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness. It was the internet that was screaming about cameos and Easter eggs and all this big status quo changes. The marketing just sold it as a Doctor Strange movie.
mhm.
And I think the movie delivered as a Doctor Strange sequel, more or less. This is one of the first times where it's like, okay, they're putting the cart before the horse here.
Right.
Well, do you think it was a mistake to because like Captain America, that movie becoming basically an Avengers movie, the Civil War movie basically becoming an Avengers type movie. It makes sense cuz he's an integral part of the Avengers. And Ant-Man was always a side quest, if you will, right? He was the a little diversion in between the bigger films. And to take what made Ant-Man good, making it more street level, making and I know there was science fiction involved in it, but making it a smaller sort of picture and then blowing it up, I don't think it served Ant-Man the character or Peyton Reed as the director. I don't think it served him well, either of them.
No, not at all. I mean, I think what we, one of the biggest problems with the Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania, and this was my fear from the very first trailer, is that the movie as it plays out could involve any hero in the MCU, and the storyline would barely change an ounce.
Yes.
Hmm.
And it is not an Ant-Man story. And you can argue that oh, it's about Scott bonding with his daughter after being gone for 5 years and dealing with the expectations that she had on him because she held him up as this hero figure, and yeah, that's kind of there, but is it?
Hmm.
And and again, that might have been in the original screenplay.
Hmm.
I will assume it was. I will give them the benefit of the doubt.
Do you
Um,
have you been hearing, because you now don't just write about box office, but you cover the whole film industry over at the Wrap. What are you hearing, or what is the scuttlebutt about what could Marvel's response to this be? Are they feeling a little back on their heels with the reception to this movie? Marvel has not been in this position, save a Hulk movie back in what, 2008 or 2010. Everything's been a success. Do you feel like
Eternals, I would argue, was a pretty big stinker.
Eternals
Mhm.
was a stinker,
Um,
but it had the COVID cover,
yes, it did. It had an alibi.
and they have had a rough year reception wise. Do you think there will be any thought given to some of the uh creative choices they've been making, or some of the critiques that they get now, which is especially with this Ant-Man Quantumania movie, everything's on a green screen. That is one of the
Yeah.
big dings. You look at the promos for Quantumania, and it looks like none of these actors ever met. There is nothing practical. I mean, more than any other Marvel movie, that seems to be the feeling around this. Are you hearing any possibility where Marvel might actually take stock, have come to
Well,
Jesus
I think
moment?
the fact I think the fact they delayed the Marvels to November
Hmm.
is an encouraging sign that and again, it's at the end of the day, they are I don't know how much of the whole we need 4 movies and 5 TV shows every year thing is by their choice, or whether it's Bob Chapek's we and Bob Iger too. I don't want to blame everything that happened on Chapek. Um, saying we need content for the Disney Plus mill. Um,
Hmm.
and again, that's another thing that they now have to come out and say, look, guys, you don't really have to watch the Disney Plus shows if you don't want to. Don't worry. Because they need to have to now
Right.
fight a
Mhm.
perception that in 2 years, if you haven't seen all of these Marvel shows and movies that maybe you weren't interested in, you're not going to be able to enjoy Avengers the Kang Dynasty.
Right.
And
Right.
that's
Now it's
probably
yeah.
nonsense. I mean, my brother in law saw the Avengers, and that was his first MCU movie, and he had a grand old time. I
Right.
took my
Right.
daughter to the premiere of Avengers Endgame. She had barely seen any Marvel movies, and she enjoyed it.
Hmm. Hmm.
Ironically,
Yeah.
the only part that she was confused was Michael Douglas's cameo, which is ironic because she's seen the Ant-Man movies.
Wow. Listen,
So
people
that
are
was just
people are smart. People catch up.
well, and the movies have always been very good about, you know, helping you out a little bit.
Hmm.
I mean, the second trailer to Avengers Infinity War, that entire trailer was here's this big bad guy. His name is Thanos. He wants to wipe out half the world. He's going to get the stones. If he gets the stones, he's going to snap his fingers and destroy the world. Let's go stop him.
Hmm.
And that's all you need to know
Right.
walking into that movie.
Right. Right.
What's truly interesting about the way the Marvel movies are now just constructed. And Scott, I don't know if you were ever a comic book person or a comic book fan. I know Pat, you were a fantasy baseball fan, so
Yes.
you did not get into comic books. But
My dad said
during
pick
the
one,
late
and I picked
'80s,
fantasy baseball.
and I think you picked
Fair.
correctly at the
Mhm.
time, very, very much so. Late '80s, '90s, that was the time when everything was a crossover, right? Every character was so there was a storyline that you had to buy 6, 7 other comics. Sometimes it was the whole line. Every Marvel comic book was connected to one thing, and people started to complain about it. They were having issues with it because you know, as a kid, I'm 9 years old. Do I have I don't have $20 to buy every Marvel title, and it's the same issue. It feels like history repeating itself in a different format, and you already saw what that did to the comic industry, and it's just interesting that these same problems are arising now in the cinematic version.
Well, yes, and as a DC fan back in the day, yeah, I could count there's many times where the Batman arc that I was enjoying at the time was kneecapped by a giant crossover, and that
Mhm.
always made me mad. And frankly, I mean, you know, various factors notwithstanding, you can argue that Infinity War and Endgame really kneecap several of their standalone franchises. Ant-Man,
Mhm.
Guardians of the Galaxy, to a
Mhm.
certain extent, even Black Panther. I mean, obviously nobody was expecting Chadwick Boseman to die in between the two Black Panther movies, but one of my issues I had with the film in terms of mourning his loss is that in the in-film universe, T'Challa's died 3 times right on screen.
It's true.
Mhm. Mhm.
And, I realize that's not fair, but nonetheless, it's, to be fair, I had the same, when I watched Logan, it's like, oh wow, Professor Xavier's dead, except I've seen him die at least once before on screen.
Mhm.
He's died 4 times in various X-Men and Marvel movies. He died in The Last Stand. He died in the retcon future of Days of Future Past. He died in Logan, and he died in Doctor Strange.
And we
Yeah.
may get to see him die in Deadpool 3, where
We
Wolverine
may,
is
oh
back
God,
and
oh
Professor X could
Jesus,
very well die in that movie.
that would,
That would
yes,
add some money to that box office, I'm sure.
that's got to
It's
be
a
a
big
record.
draw. All right, so
That's got to be a record.
anything
Um,
else before we move on to the new movies for this weekend?
well,
Anything else you think we should keep in mind about this Ant-Man
I
drop?
think we are entering a new normal
Mm,
where the Marvel movies are still big, but they're no longer the uncontested tentpole champions, and they are playing more to the fans than they used to. When
mhm,
in phase one and phase two, and to a certain extent phase three, well, Marvel was very big, partially because they were these big fan-driven nerd properties that also brought out the date night crowds,
mhm, mhm,
and they played to general audiences. And now I think you're going to be something similar to what you saw. For example, in November of 2012, the Twilight Saga Breaking Dawn Part 2 closes out the series. It makes 142 on opening weekend, makes 800 million worldwide, probably playing 90% of diehard Twilight fans, right?
mm,
I mean, how many
Mhm.
people that have never seen a Twilight film are going to walk into Breaking Dawn Part 2? Unless they're on a date or they're with a friend or whatever.
confused, yeah.
But because of that, that film can make a gajillion dollars right alongside Skyfall making 1.1 billion, right alongside Lincoln making 300 million, because the audience that went to Twilight only went to the movies that weekend because Twilight was there. And if Twilight wasn't there, they would have either gone to something else or they would have stayed home.
Mhm, mhm,
So what we may be seeing is there's going to be a ceiling on most Marvel films. Maybe not counting the Avengers team ups. We'll see. And that ceiling is going to be closer to what it was in 2000 through 2017. Because you got to remember, before Black Panther, no Spider-Man, no Marvel movie without Spider-Man or Iron Man had made over $869 million.
mhm,
Mhm.
So it wasn't even, oh, is it going to cross a billion? The biggest no Spider-Man, no Iron Man Marvel movie was Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 with 869 million. Um, and after that it was Thor Ragnarok with 854, and
mhm.
that was in 2017. Before 2016 it was Guardians of the Galaxy Part 1 with 773 million.
Right,
And then, Captain America the Winter Soldier was 714, which was about what Dawn of the Planet of the Apes did that year.
right,
So I mean, they were, everybody was in the game.
right.
It's the Marvel movies weren't quite dominating in the way they were in 2018 and 19, and by default 21 and 22.
Mhm, mhm.
Well, in 21, I guess.
Yeah. So
Um,
it just might
so you're
be
going to see
that
a scene where,
it just might be that 2018 and 2019, that run of Infinity War to Endgame is just a special time for this series, and
yes,
that will be the peak. There's not gonna
and
be something that brings these movies back to being as popular as they were in that stretch. You're a situation where a
and
Captain Marvel movie that people didn't really like made over $1 billion because it was a Marvel movie at the time when they were at their hottest.
yes, it was the first female-led Marvel movie, and discourse notwithstanding, it was a perfectly satisfying
Right.
3-star sci-fi adventure that plays great as a Friday movie night.
Mhm.
Um, And but yeah, I mean, and not to be a schmuck about this, but to the extent that maybe the next Avengers film was going to be huge because you had, Tom Holland's Spider-Man and Captain Marvel and T'Challa's Black Panther. You don't got those anymore.
Right, right,
Mhm.
right, 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 right. They and
All due respect,
we're
Chadwick
about to say
Boseman is
goodbye to the
yeah,
Guardians. Part 3, that'll be the
yeah,
end of them, and that is officially really the end to the link to the original golden era of the MCU. This Guardians 3 movie. I
yeah,
mean, Clayton and I both obviously think this is going to be gigantic. Maybe it should be in anyone's predictions for top 3 of the summer. Any reason to disagree
yeah.
with that, Scott?
No, I mean no, but I think it's going to be an anomaly going forward.
Right, right. Uh,
Um, and and even so, without China, and China certainly doesn't seem to be, it's very complicated. I mean,
mhm,
I for what it's there's a variety of reasons of why Hollywood movies aren't doing as well in China as they were 3 4 years ago,
mhm, mhm,
but they're still not doing as well as they were 3 4 years ago.
mhm, mhm.
So again, I mean, it's going to be very hard for any movie, to crack 1 billion these days without an extra 100 million in China, maybe an extra 25 50 from Russia.
Right, right,
And
right,
that's, I mean, I don't want to say that's fine because what's happening in Russia is bad,
right.
but I think there's value in the $1 billion mark not being sort of the expected total for any remotely successful picture.
Yes, yes. We
Um,
have to lower our expectations on these movies, but let's move on to, if the Marvel movies aren't the center of pop culture anymore, the movie that was the center of pop culture this weekend was Cocaine Bear. So Cocaine Bear overperforming in an incredible way. I mean, basically overperforming by upwards of 8 to 10 million over what people were predicting. So Scott,
It
did you
made
see
$23 million,
Wow.
and that number kept going up over the weekend. People thought that, as it
yes.
is when you get high, there's gonna be a come down sometime around, Saturday night, maybe Sunday morning, possibly, but it just ended up higher than they expected.
I
Wow.
mean, yeah, its multiplier was, and I should have looked this up earlier. Doo, doo, doo. It was a 2.655 multiplier, which is spectacular for an R-rated schlock horror movie or
Wow.
Yes.
comedy. I don't know if it's a horror movie. It's not particularly scary, but that's a different conversation. And yeah, I mean, once I saw it, it's like, okay, yeah, 20 wouldn't have shocked me
Mhm.
because the reviews were good, and the reviews were good in a way that's like, look, yes, it's goofy, the premise is silly, but you get what you pay for, and it's a good movie.
Right. There
Mhm.
And
even
I think that's always the danger when you're selling these goofball titles, is that no one's gonna shell out movie theater money and movie theater time to see a so bad it's good movie.
Mhm.
They need
Mhm.
to know that it's good,
Mhm.
and that's why I think Snakes in a Plane, the biggest mistake they made was not screening it for critics,
Mhm.
Mm.
Eh,
because you created the impression that it was such a piece of garbage that it was entirely on fumes and buzz. But had that film screened for press, I think it would have gotten good reviews, not raves, but it's a solid 3-star picture.
I mean, Universal seems to have remember I mean, of course you remember, years ago Universal tried to do their dark universe, bring back the Universal monsters, but uh, they've created this universal genre now of these sort of schlocky horror comedy action, from Violent Night in the fall and the winter,
Hmm.
into Megan, now into Cocaine Bear. This is almost the dark universe that they tried to create years ago. These are the
It
universal
was the dark
monsters.
universe we needed, or the dark universe that we deserved, but it
Yes.
wasn't the one we could handle back then.
Yes,
Mhm.
Santa, Cocaine Bear, and Megan. These are the new
And kind of
universal
sort of Knock at the
monsters.
Cabin.
And sort of
Um,
well, I mean, Knock at the Cabin is a Universal movie
eh,
that didn't do as
yeah,
well as people hoped, and I think
it's
one
also
thing
not fun.
that's Scott, you
I
read
mean,
my
it's a
mind.
dark,
Bingo.
grim. I
Bingo.
mean, even if you know nothing about it, once you hear the premise, you think, "Oh, this is going to have some kind of unhappy ending. I don't know
Yes.
what, but this ain't going to end happily."
Yeah, and I mean, if you
Um,
want to speak to that, that seems to be the unifying theme of these successful Universal movies, Megan, Violent Night, and now Cocaine Bear. They are promising fun. So, to you, is that the main
and
reason that Cocaine Bear hit 23 million? Did it just seem that fun?
well, the reviews were good,
Mhm.
as they were for all of these films, more or less.
Mhm.
And you had the joke I always, not the joke, before COVID, I used to say the five ingredients for a breakout studio programmer was good reviews, an easy to explain premise, a marquee director, an ensemble cast, and the promise of escapism.
Mhm.
For
Mhm.
example, Baby Driver had all five, Knives Out had all five,
Mhm.
Once Upon a Time in Hollywood had all five, etc., etc.
Mhm.
You don't need all five, but it helps.
Mhm.
And this one, I mean, you might argue only had three of the five.
Right.
Um, but it also, it was fun, and and again, it's as much as I'm perfectly fine calling these films, silly cinema. But they're also good, well-made pictures. I would argue.
Mhm. Mhm.
They're not half-assed,
Right. Right.
and I think that's important. Um,
They're not Roger
the money
Corman
is on the
movies for
screen for
sure.
all of them.
Mhm.
Yeah, or they're the better Roger Corman
Right,
movies.
right,
Mhm.
right.
um, but And I do think it's kind of wonderful that Universal has kind of gotten into this, um, while also releasing, what I think is the best film of last year, which is The Fablemans. But I digress.
Mhm, mhm,
I'm not going to be rooting against Everything Everywhere All at Once, because that was one of the best movies of last year.
mhm.
So tomato, tomato.
But Cocaine Bear
Um,
allows them to put out a Fablemans. Spielberg has to
exactly.
basically
Yes.
thank this bear for whatever his next Universal picture is gonna be.
Yeah. Maybe he'll go up to Cocaine Bear at the MTV Movie Awards and said, "You saved cinema. You saved theaters, man."
The bear
Um,
deserves it. $23 million opening weekend, he deserves a handshake from Spielberg.
yeah. Um, and Megan opened to 30. And having watched the unrated cut on Peacock, or at least skimmed through the violent parts, they were right to go with the PG-13. The R-rated version, if that's all the R-rated version was going to be, you didn't lose much.
Mhm,
Mhm.
And
mhm.
that's not a criticism nor a compliment. It's just, whatever. There's a little bit more blood. There's slightly, one of the kills is a little bit more violent, but it's, again, I think they made the right call. It's like, okay, this is what we lose if we go with the PG-13
Right,
is, and you really don't lose, it was worth it.
right.
But isn't it
Um,
interesting that Universal right now feels like they've cracked the theatrical slash streaming business model, right? Because now with these hit movies, Peacock is a must subscribe because I think that you're going to see, I mean, you're seeing Megan dropped with the uncut, so it's something different, right? It's a different movie than
yeah,
they saw in the theater. You have Violent Night, which dropped. You're gonna have Cabin, which even though it didn't do great, I think people are gonna still want to see that. And then you have Cocaine Bear that's gonna be coming up. So it's like the theatrical model. Send this to theaters. It's big in theaters, and then people will subscribe at home. You can't just make these things straight to Peacock because people won't care.
exactly. And I've been screaming this for 2 years, which is that, with the exception of some Netflix originals, and I think Netflix has an advantage just because of its giant user base, movies that play in theaters perform far better on streaming than movies that premiere on streaming. And David Zasloff knows that.
Mhm.
He
Mhm.
saw the numbers and said, "Fuck this, we're going to theaters. This is insane."
Right, right,
Um, and it's not a complicated concept.
right.
But
No.
what surprised me is that the PVOD model that Universal more or less pioneered 3 years ago didn't cannibalize theatrical at all.
Mhm.
I mean, everybody online, it's not great that, Knock the Cabin's already on PVOD 2 weeks, 2.5, 3 weeks after theaters. But, movies that click theatrically, like Puss in Boots, Sing, A Quiet Place 2, the ones that, 45 days, 17 days, whatever later, they don't drop dead theatrically once they go onto PVOD.
Right, because you keep that
No.
price
That is a
point.
concurrent secondary revenue stream that's allowing these films to exist theatrically.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I have not been this optimistic about the fate of theatrical studio programmer in 7 years.
Yeah.
because
That's
it
great to
was June
hear.
in 2016 when I wrote my first "Sky is Falling" piece about how the general audiences went to streaming, and now non-event films are getting their asses kicked, and will anything come to save them? And it doesn't apply to everything. The Oscar films obviously aren't, you know, they're doing terribly theatrically, and I don't think PVOD is making up the difference.
Mhm.
But for just, pulpy genre films, I really, something like The Northman or Ambulance or what have you, I mean, it seems to be working where you're making enough on PVOD and then you're providing enough value to streaming that the film can be a success financially, even if it doesn't break box office records. And while
Yeah.
some of this is speculative, I mean, they're still in the Michael Bay business. They re-signed with Platinum Dunes and brought them over to Universal, which I'm guessing they wouldn't have done if Ambulance had lost money.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Um, and Focus swears that the Northman was profitable after everything was counted, which that's a $70 million original R-rated Viking actioner.
Well, they've
If that,
talked to their financiers and,
Yeah.
um, yeah, and if that film can do well theatrically, there's anything can.
So
mhm.
back on Cocaine Bear specifically, this was directed by Elizabeth Banks, who her resume is a Pitch Perfect sequel that was huge, the second movie in the series
Yes,
that what outgrossed the first
it was
one
pretty
its
good.
opening weekend, an Austin Powers 2 situation there.
Yes, that was a clear breakout sequel
Yeah.
of yes, it is Austin Powers.
And then, of course, she
Um,
had the infamous Charlie's Angels reboot that was a disaster back in November 2019. So, Cocaine
yes,
Bear was big for her. She had to fairly or unfairly prove that she wasn't a flash in the pan box office wise. And I would say no matter what happens with this movie going forward, the $23 million opening weekend, this movie is a gigantic win for her. This is
yep,
huge. She could do a sequel if she
because it is
wants.
well directed.
Yeah, it's
I mean, have you guys seen it?
I have. I will say I was not a fan in comparison
Fair.
to Megan and Violent Night. I thought those were much, to me, better versions of this type of
Uh,
movie.
I
But
might agree with you, but I will say there's a scene in the second act that's just a spectacularly constructed action sequence.
okay, I
Um, and Beyond that, I will not say. But basically, it's her saying, "Yes, I can still do action."
oh with the ambulance. I would guess. Yes,
Yes,
yes, yes. Definitely, that's the best. That's the best sequence in the movie. And yeah,
yes.
and everything in here. I would say my issue with Cocaine Bear is I wanted it to be funnier. It's more that the jokes didn't land, but the camera was in the right spot for sure. Um, so
My biggest issue with it is I'm not even sure if this is a criticism, is that the characters were developed and sympathetic enough that I had mixed feelings when they got eaten by a bear.
you
Which, when
here's
you come to a movie to watch people get eaten by a bear, and then you feel bad when they get eaten by a bear, well,
here's my big note on Cocaine Bear, to not give anything away, but there is not an annoying cokehead character in this movie. This movie's set in the 80s. How do you not have a Wall Street cokehead guy who goes there looking for the coke, gets eaten by the bear? That's the type of character that this movie
you're right.
probably
The
needed
movie needed
more
more
of.
red shirts.
Yeah, needed more villainous cokehead 80s guys for the bear to maul and us to cheer. We didn't get enough cheering
And
for the bear. I will say Ray Liotta gets a very fitting career and life finale in this movie. Um,
Yeah.
but Elizabeth Banks, I mean, God, her last name couldn't be more applicable this weekend. She is a bankable, big
Mhm.
studio director now. And listen, whether we like this movie or not, I'm always rooting for box office, and I'm always rooting for Elizabeth Banks. Any wet hot
Yeah.
American summer. So hey, it was a battle of the wet hot American summer stars, and I would say Elizabeth Banks won this one, even though Paul Rudd's movie came in first.
Mhm. Well, she definitely
um,
got the headlines. I mean, that's the
Yes.
thing is that I mean, she was on the brink. She needed a hit. She needed this thing to be what it became, and good for her. Good for her.
and not to be too navel gazy about this, but it is good that not a white guy director actually got a second chance
Mhm.
after a film as financially disastrous as Charlie's Angels.
Right.
Oh
So,
yeah.
yay.
Right.
That's so rarely you're so right, that so rarely happens, and I don't know if it's funny, I don't know if this was the project that was announced the weekend was this the project that was announced basically the weekend Charlie's Angels came out?
I think it
I don't know.
was. I think it was. I
Because
remember that was an early, maybe with first couple of weeks of the existence of the BO Boys. We were covering the Charlie's Angels episode, and we did notice how they made sure to do one of those announce her next project before the weekend came out because they wanted to get ahead of the story. And yeah, Clayton, I'm pretty sure it was Cocaine Bear.
and it's like that
Yeah.
we and I think we even said and one of BO intern Christopher, if you want to pull this audio, if you can find it, I think we were like that's that's such a move that they do is like, yeah, she's still viable. Don't worry about it. This is gonna fail, but she's still viable. And to have that project, and usually those projects never get made.
Mhm.
That if this was that and it got made and it is a hit, that is amazing.
Mhm. Mhm. So, yeah, Scott, do you foresee a Cocaine Bear 2? Of these Universal monster movies, I mean, we know we got the Megan 2 coming out. I'm pretty sure we're getting Violent Night 2, Attack on North Pole. Will we get, you know, will we get a cocaine, Kingpin Bear? Is he going to get into the drug trade himself?
Scarface with a bear.
Yeah.
Um,
There's so much
ever since
coke
I
in
was
the
a cub,
world.
I wanted to be a drug dealer.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I mean, again, it's obviously the movie's going to make decent money. I mean, it did cost 35 million,
Mhm.
so it's unless it just keeps going and going and going, it's going to be a modest hit without being an explosive.
Mhm.
But again, yeah, people seem to like it. I think the B minus from Cinema Score is sort of the horror curve, which that's the
Mhm.
one genre that pulls weird because you have people that it's too scary, it made me feel bad, and ergo the score's low. Then the other people is like it wasn't scary enough, boo hoo.
Mhm.
And with a comedy, nobody ever downgrades a movie because it's too funny.
Mhm.
Mhm.
But with horror, sometimes you'll get, oh, it's too scary, it made me feel unpleasant.
Mhm.
Um, or it had a downer ending and now I feel bad, as horror tends to do.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, will there be a Cocaine Bear 2? If they want to make one, yes. But it will be up to them, and that's a good place to be.
Right, right.
And if they make a sequel, then this is another example of a very old school concept in that it's a new franchise, an original franchise, where the sequel doesn't exist because it was planned years in advance and is part of some giant cinematic universe or what have you. The sequel exists because people liked the first one, they saw the first one, it made money, and they think people will see another one.
Right, right.
Which
Mhm.
back in my day is how sequel franchises worked.
Right. That's how
Oh,
we
yeah.
got our Mannequin 2s and our Weekend at Birdie 2s because
Yes.
people love the originals, not because they planned out a Weekend at Bernie's cinematic universe years in advance.
Yeah,
So,
they weren't like, well, we gotta write Mannequin 1 because then the second one, the Mannequin's gonna be on the loose, and we need to get there.
yeah,
It's
phase
like, no.
2 is on the loose. Yeah, they didn't do
Yeah,
a
yeah.
4-year presentation of the Mannequin movies. The first one was just a hit. So,
Mhm.
I mean, listen, let's get to the number 3 movie this weekend, which I to me, this was it's the biggest surprise, but then again, it shouldn't have been. So, the Kelsey Grammer star Jesus Revolution from Lionsgate opened at number 3 this weekend to $15.5 million. So, this is from the director of the Kurt Warner movie American Underdog. This director has had several hits in this sort of religious movie space, but this was the big dog. Jesus is the star of this, and Jesus is a movie star. I mean, I think is it safe to say that Jesus
Yeah,
is
he is a
very
butts in seats
valuable
marketing
IP?
character.
Mhm. So
Um,
where were you? What did this take you by surprise, Scott, or did you see the
no.
second coming?
Well, yes and no. I was happily surprised only in that, oh, good, these movies can still do this.
Mhm.
Because this to me is as promising a sign of business as usual box office as anything you could ask for.
Mhm.
Because prior to COVID, these films would often open with anywhere from 13 to 16 to $17 million. It was, The War Room, I Can Only Imagine, The Shack, Miracles from Heaven, Heaven is for Real, some of them from Sony, some of them from Lionsgate. Um, and that they were a viable genre, and they would pull in decent chunks of change like that. And the grim weekend of March 13th, 2020, I think it was I apologize. One's called like I Can Only Imagine, the other one's called something else. They're very similar titles, but that film opened a little below expectations because the world was starting to shut down, and that was one of the titles that I think that was in theaters when the world shut down, that probably had got kneecapped.
Mhm.
Bloodshot was always going to be a bomb. The Hunt was always going to be a bomb.
Yeah.
Onward was
Mhm.
always going to be a bomb, etc.
Exactly.
Birds of Prey was pretty much done. I would say the only films that got really shellacked mid-run were I Can Only Imagine and The Invisible Man.
Yes.
Yep.
Um,
Invisible Man could have
Even
got to
Sonic was
100
pretty much
maybe.
finished. Maybe.
Mhm.
Um, but so yeah, the fact that this film, which is also an aspirational, crowd-pleasing, it's a Christian film in the Veggie Tales vein,
Mhm.
in that it is not good. It's not a persecution complex melodrama. It's
Mhm.
not God's Not Dead
Mhm.
or
Mhm.
October Baby or whatever. Um, God's Not Dead is the exception to the rule because that film made 65 million domestic in early 2014. Most faith-based films that do exceptionally well are from a major studio like Lionsgate or Sony, and or Breakthrough, which was Fox. That was right when Fox got bought by Disney. Um, and they are, again, they're everyone welcome dramas,
Right. Right. Right.
and
They're
some
fun.
of them like Miracle. Yeah,
I
yeah,
was
they're
just gonna
relatively
say,
fun.
this looks fun.
This looks fun.
Yeah. And even 10 years ago, when you had films like Soul Surfer and Heaven is for Real, yes, they were clearly faith-based films, but they were also mainstream, star-driven, four-quadrant dramas that were already starting to become an endangered species.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Mhm.
Heaven
So,
Heaven is Real was Jennifer Garner was the lead of
yes,
that movie.
Miracles from Heaven.
Oh, Miracles, I'm sorry,
Miracles.
Miracles from Heaven.
No, that's okay. Heaven is for Real is the one with Greg Kinnear and Margot Martindale.
That's
Right.
right.
And if you want to see a faith-based drama, great. If you want to see a pretty good family melodrama with Greg Kinnear and Margot Martindale, there you go.
Right.
It's a skewed way to tie this almost back to the MCU, where for a lot of these films, the faith-based stuff is the seasoning, but it's not necessarily the main course.
Mhm.
You know,
Mhm.
uh,
Yeah, for
Varying quality notwithstanding, they work as just studio pictures.
right. I mean, for this movie, The Jesus Revolution, you're basically selling it's a Kelsey Grammer movie where he's going to play an uptight person in a role of authority who's going to get his shirt unstuffed by the ultimate
Yes,
slacker, Jesus. I mean, this is as
yes.
if just some kind of hippie slacker walked into Fraser's apartment and, sort of took him down a peg. That's what they're selling here. It just
Niles, help
happens
me.
to be faith-based.
Yeah. And John Irwin, I think he was one of the directors. He's the first guy to ever have 4 movies get an A+ from Cinema Score,
Wow. Wow.
which
Wow.
is awesome. I mean, yeah, obviously the polling is a little slanted in terms of demographics, but oh well.
Right, right. So do
um,
Well,
you see
the
this
other
catching
thing,
Oh, go for
Pat,
it.
sorry, just to interrupt quickly, is that this movie also has an actor that starred in The Chosen, which has been a Fathom event phenomenon. So this gentleman, and I'm trying to figure because it was in one of these sections of this Deadline article. I'm trying to find it, but this gentleman is shaping up to be a faith-based star. And I know
Quite
Kelsey
possibly.
Grammer is the name that the general public knows, but this gentleman seems like he's having a career in these movies or these television shows, and he could be a star in these sort of films going forward, which would be amazing.
Yeah. No, that's entirely possible. And as long as he sticks to this specific subgenre, that may well be the case. Just
Mhm.
like, I mean, it's to use a goofy example, but Denzel Washington is a butts and seats movie star when he's Righteous Revenger Man.
Mhm.
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 Um,
Mhm.
so when you have a star in a specific box, then yes, movie stardom can exist.
Yes.
Do
Um,
you see any more mainstream crossover potential going forward for Jesus Revolution? Does this feel like a one weekend phenomenon, drop off the face of the earth,
um,
or is Jesus going to
not
be here for a
necessarily,
while?
because I mean, well, I mean, it might be here for a while just because it's preaching the converted.
Mhm.
But a movie like The Shack, which starred Sam Worthington, Octavia Spencer, so again, mainstream stars, that made 57 million domestic in early 2017 from a $16 million opening.
Mhm.
So that stuck around for a while.
Mhm. Mhm.
And again, the I don't know what a successful film like this does in the new COVID normal. So I don't know if it's gonna. But let me put this: if it plays like these films that we've been talking about, it will not drop dead next weekend at all.
Right, right, right.
And this is a word of mouth sort of hit. This is what we call a church bus
Yes.
hit. And the gentleman I'm looking the name for was Jonathan Rumi, I think is his name.
Okay.
And I'm also seeing here that this movie, and the reason why the tracking was all off on this is because it had a staggering amount of walk-up business.
Wow.
74% of those seeing this movie bought the ticket the day of or the day before, which is not what you see with a lot of Marvel movies. Like this is definitely
You
a
used to.
yes, but now it's all pre-orders.
Yeah. And that is a terrific stat that I didn't even catch.
Wow.
That's terrific. That's amazing.
I
Um, and yeah, I think again, I have not seen the movie. I can't speak to the film, but I don't think it's going to vanish off the face of the earth.
wow. Wow. I mean, that
Also
seems like
because a
the
lot of the films,
Mhm.
yeah,
Well, I was gonna say that seems like the type of response that you would have imagined Jesus's preaching must have gotten back in the day. A lot of walk-up business, a lot of word of
Oh,
mouth. They
absolutely.
weren't really pre-ordering reservations of the speeches. It was a lot of walk-up. All they did was walk up. So it makes sense that his film has got a lot of walk-up business as well.
that had a very cool preacher vibe to it that I enjoyed.
Well, I'm inspired by the films that we're talking about. Did a little snorting when we were talking about Cocaine Bear, and I go into preacher mode when we're talking Jesus Revolution. And listen,
It is funny, yeah, that it was like decadence versus kind of holiness at the theater,
well, it was
and
something
that's
for
a very
everyone.
interesting. Yeah,
Yeah, which is how the market's going to survive, how it's going to come back, because you have something for everyone. And say what you will about Marvel, the most important thing is that even if Marvel is in some kind of decline, and we'll see, people are still showing up for other stuff too,
Mm,
and that's what's so important.
right, right.
yes,
Um,
yeah. The
because they're
tentpole is
showing
doing
up
its
for
job in a way, right? Because it is
yes,
keeping the tent up so that people
yes,
can come in and be converted by Jesus, or
more
do
cocaine there.
some rails with the bear.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I mean, it's this is what a healthy theatrical marketplace looks like. And I think we would have been here a lot sooner had the studios not been, for a variety of reasons, some better than others, gun shy about actually putting out a regular theatrical slate.
Yep,
Yeah.
stingy with the
And I
product.
think now that Wall Street has said, yeah, never mind everything we said about streaming, we want profits now. Now, I think it's open season because of course you got to release the stuff in theater. That's the only way you're going to make hard revenue.
I
Hmm.
mean, listen, while we got you here, Scott, we should look ahead just a little bit to what this March is. And this March is so exciting to me. I mean, the fact that you have Creed and Scream and Shazam and John Wick. I feel like I might even be missing a big one that's coming out in March, but
65. That's the
65.
Adam Driver picture versus the
And you know
dinosaurs.
what? I
Um,
have a lot more high hope for that movie And I know that's a much bigger scale movie than things like Cocaine Bear or Megan
Yeah.
or Violent Night. It definitely needs to open 50, 60 plus to be able to be successful.
Wait,
But
wait, 65?
65, you would
I
you
don't think it was that expensive.
well, I
Like,
but
I mean,
it's I would guess that that is a movie that needs to make 100 million to be successful, right? Do you see that as a movie that can
I
make 70 or 80 domestic and be considered successful?
well, if it does well overseas, sure, but
Right.
that's the
That's
big
true.
question.
That's true. It
You're right. Yes, it's a $90 million picture, so it can't,
right.
Violent Night type opening isn't going to be anywhere near good enough.
Right.
That being
Mhm.
said, I have to assume Sony isn't oblivious to what the marketplace looks like now,
Mhm.
and I think this is the kind of movie that is sort of protected by their first look pay deal with Netflix.
Mhm. They'll be getting
Because
paid quite a
Netflix
Yes.
lot.
paid a lot of money in, I believe, late 2021, yeah, to basically get the first pay TV window for Sony theatricals.
Mhm.
And good for Netflix for realizing slightly out of the curve that they needed theatrical movies to boost their viewership numbers. And good for Sony to saying, to hell with the streaming war, we're going to get rich by selling the guns.
Mhm. Mhm.
Mhm.
Um, and now they have an extra layer of protection to justify making films like 65 and The Woman King and Where the Crawdads Sing. So even
Yes.
if they don't break out huge at the box office, although Woman King did well domestically, Crawdads was a huge hit, just period. You have that layer of, okay, well, this is part of what Netflix paid us for,
Right.
if that makes
We're getting
sense.
that cash no matter
Um,
what. And I
yeah,
definitely feel more confident in an original sort of gonzo premise like 65 coming off of the success we've seen with Megan, Violent Night, Cocaine Bear. But yeah, looking ahead, what is your thought just on this next month of March? There is no Marvel movie, yet I feel like we may have a potential for a big hit every single week of the month.
yes. I think this next March is going to be a sign that we're back for good or not,
Mm,
because this is the most crowded March we've had at least since 2018, if not 2017.
wow.
Um, and
How
Creed, that's the kind of film that opens to 35, 40 million. Um, Scream is tracking at around 35, 40 million. And assuming the reviews are good, I don't see any reason why it won't get there. People like the last
oh
one. You have
man.
earned goodwill. I don't think Jenna Ortega is going to be the difference between a hit and a flop, but I think she gets you a few extra bucks. She's an added value element,
Mhm.
which is why, and I have no idea, but I will laugh very hard if it goes G.I. Joe Retaliation and she dies in the opening scene.
Oh no.
But I digress.
No, they can't.
I
I'm
think
guessing that's not going to
They
happen.
cannot.
I
But
think you gotta do reshoots if that was the case, because I'm more
yeah,
bullish on Jenny Ortega as a driver for this than you are, only because I I work with a younger generation that are very into Jenny Ortega in a way
yeah,
that, and I know this is like an R-rated film, but they find a way. Life
well,
finds a
yeah,
way.
and that's
And I think
um,
that's I mean, and also, like you said, it's goodwill towards this franchise. People are
yes,
very excited for it, because the last one was good, but I do think she's a big element of why, because Wednesday was a smash, and she's
oh
sort
yeah,
of a style icon now. So she better
that
be the final girl here. If she's not, I mean, there's something they messed up
hey,
over there.
if they had the kind of courage that Wes Craven had once upon a time, she'd die halfway through the movie.
No.
I mean, listen, they killed Jamie Kennedy in that second movie, and that was shocking. And some
Exactly,
people
and that
say
was
that
awesome.
the franchise hasn't recovered from that. I don't
And they're
agree. I think that
wrong
was
because not everything's supposed to be a 12 film franchise.
absolutely. There was never supposed to
Um,
be six screams, but now we
yeah,
have it, and we're happy about it.
yeah. And 65, I don't know. I honestly don't. Um, Shazam, it's tracking badly, but they still got 3.5 weeks, and they really are about to start the marketing campaign right now.
Mm,
I
Hmm.
know it's screened for some press on Saturday. I've not seen it. But if it's as good as the first film, and the first film was excellent, I expect that they'll be screening it out the wazoo and they'll let the embargo drop early enough to spread the good word. Now, I do think the film had it opened in, say, 2021 or 2022 and not a non-COVID time, and without all the ridiculous DC melodrama that, eh, I do think the film might have been a breakout sequel. People saw the first Shazam, they liked the first Shazam, they
Mhm.
saw it again or discovered it when it was in post theatrical. And so in the normal world, this would be one of those films where all the earned goodwill from the first one pays off in the second one. But circumstances being what they are, I'm no longer as confident as I might have been about that diagnosis. I hope I'm wrong, but we'll see.
Yeah, I mean,
Now
Because I
I
really like
think
the first.
Shazam will be a test of whether people will go see a movie that in the scheme of things, if you're talking DCEU wise, matters not. Right?
Yeah,
The strings and the things that are coming out of this film will not be tied up most likely. And so, will this be enough of a good movie that it can stand alone? And that's going to be the
and
huge question. Or are people going to say it's not worth my time because it's not part of the new plan, the new
um,
10 movie,
yeah,
10
but
year
I mean,
plan?
which is a shame because all they have to say is, "Look, if people like Zachary Levi as Shazam, we're keeping him as Shazam."
Hmm.
right.
And indirectly, I'm guessing that's what they're planning because why discard something that works?
True.
Right.
Um,
And he's not been an issue in
yeah,
any significant way, vis-a-vis,
he has not gone on a Carmen San Diego type crime spree.
absolutely, yes.
Um,
Absolutely. It's a very good way of saying that.
Yes.
do 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 do.
I do
Um,
hope that there was doo-wop playing in the car part of the time.
yes. And then John Wick 4, which I mean, the first one, the second one doubled the first one, the third one doubled the second one. I don't think this was going to double the third one just because different world and at some point you peak. But
Mhm.
assuming it's a good movie, I think it should perform on par with the third one
Mhm.
because unlike a lot of franchises, this is one that gets part of its popularity stems from a promise that this will be a good, well-made movie
Mhm.
made by people who are good at what they do, who make a movie that looks good on an IMAX or Dolby Vision screen, and you get your money's worth.
Yeah.
There's a certain polish and spectacle and care that you see with all three John Wick movies. They feel like they're made by hand.
Mhm.
And assuming this continues that, I don't see any reason for a huge drop off. Now, 3 years ago, when John Wick 3 was kicking ass, my big question was, is the fourth one going to do what Mission Impossible, Jason Bourne, Resident Evil, Fast and Furious did, which is go into hyperdrive overseas in the fourth chapter? I'm
Mhm.
obviously, for a number of reasons, no longer as confident about that as I might have been 3.5 years ago.
Mhm.
One of that is because China's not in play the way it might have been. Not that the other three played in China as far as I know at all, but that might have been something that was on their mind.
Right.
Um, that being said, again, the last one cost 75. Let's say this one cost 90. I don't know. So, if it does the same as the third one, everyone will be very happy.
Yeah. And I
Now,
will
Scott,
say
can I ask you, with the proliferation of this 87 North type action movie, do you think that diminishes John Wick? I think John Wick is the gold standard of all those. I mean, it's the crown jewel of that sort of film. Do you think that all those films are diluting that brand at all?
I don't think so because I think the only people that know are people that are aware enough to still also know that John Wick is better than, say, Bullet Train
Mhm.
Hmm.
or
Mhm.
Gunpowder Milkshake or what have you.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, that is not a that could be that could be a scenario, but I don't think so. Because again, I do still think that people like John Wick because of the John Wick character played by Keanu Reeves and the specific variables of the specific franchise. And the fact that
Mhm.
8711 also made Bullet Train and Violent Night and Nobody and all that jazz. Many of them are good movies. Um, I still think John Wick is its own thing. Um, I
Yeah.
hope I'm right.
Yeah. And you could always bring them together at some point. I think everyone's hoping for a Nobody John Wick
Mm,
crossover someday. Um And one thing that is so interesting to note with John Wick coming out in March of 2023 is there was a time when John Wick 4 and The Matrix, was it 4, were both supposed to
Yeah.
come out against each other in, would that have been May 2020?
Yes. Yeah, May 2021, the pre-Memorial Day weekend, and obviously that was never gonna happen, it just made for fun conversations.
Right,
But
right.
even then, I argued that at least domestically, John Wick was gonna kick its ass.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, and I think now we're seeing worldwide the same thing.
Yeah. I
Because call me crazy, I think John Wick's gonna make do better than 170 global,
I think
and
so.
I don't think HBO Max was that big of a factor, I really don't.
No, not at
Just
all.
because all that year, the movies that succeeded.
Right.
I mean, Doom still crawled to 400 million for God's sakes.
Right. Godzilla
And
v Kong.
yeah, Godzilla v Kong did more than Godzilla King of the Monsters, a lot more.
Right. Right. Right.
Um, Conjuring 3 made 200 on a 39 budget.
Right. Right.
Um,
Yeah, Matrix 4 was always going to bomb, and John Wick 4,
yeah,
it would be shocking if it's not a success. So March is looking very
but
exciting.
there's one more
What am I
because we have Paramount's Dungeons and Dragons: Honor Among Thieves, which they are
That's
very
yeah.
high on. They're premiering at South by Southwest. They think they've got the goods. And so far, every piece of marketing that I've seen shows that they're learning the right lessons from Jumanji Welcome to the Jungle,
Okay.
which is that they made a movie that was fun and quirky and colorful with a familiar cast that kids know, that adults know. And it's the kind of film that, even if you don't give two craps about Dungeons and Dragons, looks like a darn fun time at the movies.
Mhm. Mhm.
Now, is that the case? I don't know. I mean, obviously, I'm not expecting to do Jumanji numbers. That film made $900 million.
Right, right.
They'd be thrilled with 300. I'm pretty sure.
Right, right. Could it do
Um,
Sonic
I have
numbers?
to, yeah, that's actually a good comparison. Yeah,
Mhm.
I think that's what they're hoping for.
Yeah.
And I
Well,
think
thank you.
Dungeons and
That's
Dragons benefits from the fact that any other attempts at a Dungeon and Dragon movie has done so poorly that they're not even remembered. So I
yes,
mean I think there was the one with what Marlon Wayans and
yes.
someone else, and
That
this was
that guy that
yeah.
played Jimmy Olsen on Lois and Clark, whose name I don't remember.
Yeah, and so that's such a forgettable movie that it's not gonna be tainted. This isn't a
No.
tainted IP at the except for maybe super hardcore,
Well,
fans.
apparently there's some kind of online controversy about Dungeons and Dragons as it relates to the board game that I looked it up just because I was curious. It's like, I'm pretty sure that won't affect the movie because I read on it and I have no idea what the hell they're talking about.
Absolutely, I read
It
up
is
on that
so
too.
inside baseball
Yeah.
that is like, I understand a third of these words.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Can you explain it?
I have no clue. I also was doing it to be like, "Is this gonna affect the movie?" And halfway through, I was like, "This is not gonna affect the movie, and it's making my head hurt." And so I stopped
Exactly.
reading.
It's like, I have no idea what the hell they're talking about.
Yeah.
Um,
So yeah,
but anyway,
it is a
um,
very exciting next couple of months at the box office, and it's nice to know that all of this is very possible without there being, Shazam's a superhero movie, but Shazam's probably way down the list of even the movies that we're
yeah.
expecting to be the big hits in March and April. So this is all happening without it being driven by superhero movies. It is
And then in
exciting
early
to
April,
see.
Super Mario Brothers movie, which is my Hail Mary pick for the biggest grosser of the year.
Yes, I
Wow.
think we're all on that I believe we're all on that same page that this is going to
Fair
be
enough.
Yeah.
massive.
Yeah.
Because do you know anyone in any walk of your lives, civilian, movie nerds, civilians, that aren't at least somewhat curious about it? And that could probably easily be coaxed into seeing it if somebody they knew wanted to go. Whether it's a child, whether it's a parent, whether it's a cousin,
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
Well, it's Illumination as well, and they
Yeah. It's
always
a Mario movie produced by Nintendo from the guys that made Minions and Sing.
Yeah.
yeah, I
It's
think we
it's
were
amazing.
mentioning this on our last episode about how the age range for Mario is staggering because
Yeah.
there are people who played that are in their late 50s who grew up playing Mario, and there are little kids that are playing it on the Switch or whatnot. I mean, this thing we talk about
And
Barbie being an IP that's never been exploited.
yeah,
I mean, Mario's the big one this year that has never been exploited, and the sky's the limit for that film.
and that's another situation where the previous attempt was so awful that barely anyone remembers it.
Yeah, the live action version, absolutely.
Yeah,
I didn't even think about it until you mentioned it because this is
exactly.
animation where it should live, and yeah, I mean obviously we'll have you on before that opens to talk more about it, but yeah, that thing's gonna be huge.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's basically got April to itself, which isn't abnormal because there are plenty of Aprils where you had like a Fast and Furious movie and then 3 weeks of nothing until the summer starts.
Right.
hmm
Right.
So
Right.
that's pre-COVID, that's normal.
Right.
You got Mario Brothers on the 7th, Universal's other movie, Renfeld, they're just knocking them out
Yeah,
on the 14th, along with Screen Gems, The Pope's Exorcist, which looks like a lot of fun.
yeah.
And this is from someone that generally doesn't get into Exorcist movies that much because I'm Jewish and I don't care.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um,
But the Pope's such a big. I mean, talk about a
yeah,
big get
He's big
for
IP.
an
exactly. Russell
exorcism.
Crowe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
um, and then on the very little on the 21st,
Yeah. So I mean,
Evil Dead Rise.
Oh, Evil Dead Rising could be big. And you know what? That's a great thing to bring up is they better put some ad dollars behind that friggin' movie. We cannot have another Last Dance situation here or a house party.
Well, to be fair, and I don't disagree with you, but they said they were going to expand it in weekend 2, and I thought they were just going to throw in a couple extra hundred screens, but they doubled the screen count and put it on 3,000 screens.
You're right, they
On
did.
its second weekend.
what
That's
do
very
you see
true.
as the reasoning to that strategy? Why
I
not
think
open
they
it on
ran the
3,000?
numbers and said we can make $8 million on 1,500 screens and save a lot of money,
Mm,
or we can basically double our marketing spend and double our screen count and maybe make 12 million.
mm. Okay,
Mhm.
so they just didn't see the world in which Magic Mike makes in the high teens in an opening weekend. Which I guess that's fair
I
because
think
the second
15
one
would have been
did.
the I think 15 would have been the peak.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
And
and to go back to I think our thesis of like especially right now these movies need to promise fun. Magic Mike
yeah,
3 wasn't promising the same fun that Magic Mike XXL did or that Cocaine Bear does or that Megan does or that maybe Renfield will. I think Renfield is promising that. And so Magic
yeah,
Mike 3 wasn't really doing that. It was promising something more low
it
key.
was it felt like a Magic Mike movie for the pure flicks slash Puritans crowd.
Mhm.
Mm.
It
Mhm.
seemed aimed at the people on Twitter that are always complaining about sex scenes.
Right, right,
Um,
right.
but
So it's I think we're all excited about these next couple of months and I'm feeling optimistic. And one
me
last thing
too.
I'll bring up that makes me feel optimistic about the box office is this Greatest Showman-esque run for Puss in Boots. I mean, we may be changing it. The nomenclature may no longer be the Greatest Showman run. You may be calling these leggy holiday films that open small and then leg out to giant numbers. That may be a Puss in Boots Last Witch situation going forward.
It's what's wonderful is 5 years ago when Greatest Showman was doing its thing. I made the joke about how the Greatest Showman is out there. It can't be bargained with, reasoned with, or doesn't feel pity or remorse, and it absolutely will not stop ever until you're dead.
Hmm.
And I'm thinking, haha, I'm funny, whatever. I'm never going to be able to make that joke again. But then I did.
Yeah.
I was able to because of Everything Everywhere All at Once. And then I did it again with Puss in Boots. So
Yes.
we've actually had two Greatest Showman type runs in a year where allegedly nobody was going to the movies.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
kids weren't going to the movies. That's the other thing
Yeah.
too. Families weren't going to the movies.
Yeah.
You know,
Spoiler, they were.
yeah,
They were.
And
Which you should have realized when Sonic made 70 million in opening weekend.
Exactly.
absolutely.
They just weren't going to Disney movies or specifically
Yeah,
Pixar movies.
which is a complicated and awkward conversation.
Yeah.
But I think
Yeah.
Shapek really screwed the pooch there.
Yeah,
And
Yeah.
and they
I
weren't
don't know
going
if the
to
damage
see.
can be undone.
They weren't going to see Lao Lao Crocodile because he
Yeah.
is a certified bum. as
Yeah.
we have said. He's
Yeah.
certified bum IP who should be drummed out of Hollywood.
And yet, weirdly, one of Javier Bardem's best performances.
Oh,
I mean, that's the thing. Yeah.
Javier
Yeah,
Bardem could stay, but Lyle never allowed back
yeah,
in Hollywood. That was a
Ja
disaster.
Javier's got the gold. He can stay.
yeah.
The thing with we were talking earlier about the PVOD not cannibalizing. This film went to PVOD
Mhm.
weeks ago, and it is still priced at $30 to buy and 25 to rent. And you know what? Some families are doing that, but it ain't keeping other families from going to the theater.
Yeah, I mean, it's fucking amazing.
Right,
I
right,
mean, there's
and
no other way to say it.
And it's opens in Japan. It still hasn't opened in Japan yet,
Oh my
wow,
goodness.
which could be 10 million or it could be 50. Who knows?
Who
Japan's
knows?
it's a very unpredictable marketplace.
wow.
Yeah.
But as we've
Um,
been saying, and they've listened to us, they've kept it off the cock. They have not dropped
Mhm.
Puss on the cock. They have let it stay theatrical and PVOD only, and that has
Yep.
been a huge,
well, I think
huge.
that's because they still have a deal with Netflix, which means Netflix gets it sometime this year
So it
because
couldn't have even.
DreamWorks is under a different deal.
Wow, so the puss gets flixed before it ever lands on the cock.
Yes,
That is
yes.
huge news.
I
Wow.
mean,
I didn't know
the
it could
one of the
get
biggest
flicked.
one of the most watched movies on streaming last year was Sing 2 on Netflix.
That is an amazing point. They never even had the opportunity to drop the puss on the cock. It had to get flicked first.
You've been practicing that one for a while, haven't
That
you?
I mean, it's been
Yeah.
a big story that we've been covering, Scott. We've been covering this
Yeah.
this puss on the cock story.
Absolutely. And we do have a lot of kids listening, so that's why we're trying not to
Of
be,
course.
we're trying to be a little bit more family friendly.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
So,
We're talking about the puss on the cock.
Well, it's just
Scott,
commonly used vernacular in the
Yes,
business. You know
yeah,
that as
of course.
working at the Wrap, you know that's the how they refer to
yeah.
that movie in that service.
Yeah, because
Yes.
you can't waste valuable magazine real estate.
Syllables.
Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. So
Uh,
Scott, listen, we appreciate every time you're on the show, giving us your time. So anything else stick out to you about this past weekend or coming up? What is your sort of final take about where we are right now, this moment in time, late February in the box office?
I think 2022 was down by about a third from 2019, but it also had a third fewer movies.
Hmm.
I think as long as we get, the same number of movies that we would have gotten in normal times, I am optimistic enough to think that box office might be pretty close to pre-COVID times. Maybe
Wow.
not 2019 because you don't have, the last Avengers and the last Star Wars and the last Toy Story, so we thought, and all that nonsense. But, maybe 2016, 2017, 2018. I think the state of theatrical is as strong as we could expect at this point in time after a 3-year pandemic.
Wow.
And
That's great to
Wow.
hear.
That
From your
and
lips to Jesus's ears.
yeah.
and we owe it all to Godzilla and King Kong.
Yes. Never listen, I will always say the biggest disgrace of last year's Oscars was not the slap, it was the fact that Godzilla and Kong didn't get to open the show.
Mhm.
They should have been
Yeah.
front and center welcoming us to the Academy Awards. And maybe this year
No.
you make up for it by putting Megan and Cocaine Bear to open the show.
Yep.
Though I will say the first sign of hope in 2021 was Tom and Jerry opening to 14 million in early February
Yes.
Yes.
because
That was
that was
huge.
like holy shit. Because that's and I coined the phrase successful disappointment, and that's basically where, oh my god, this film is doing as well as it would have if it had kind of sort of stumbled in pre-COVID times. That's wonderful.
Yes.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, I mean it's frustrating because Godzilla v Kong, Venom, Quiet Place 2, Spider-Man, obviously. Tentpoles could have been back in full form as early as mid 2021 if the industry had let that be the case.
Mhm,
Mhm.
mhm. But we're back now, and we've got
Yeah.
even non-tent poles doing great business at the box office. So I feel it. I think we're all feeling more optimistic on this episode than we have in maybe any of our get-togethers these last few years. So,
But to
Yep.
be fair, I am on cocaine.
to be fair, yes.
Yeah.
We've all hung out with the bear this weekend, so who knows what's
Yeah.
going on
That's
inside of us.
that's a good term to now coin. What did you do this weekend? Hung out with the bear, if you know
Hang
what I
out with the
mean.
bear. I'm gonna go in the bathroom, gonna go hang out with the bear.
Yeah.
So Scott, tell our listeners, our wannabe O boys, wannabe O girls, wannabe O people,
People.
where they could find you right now and what you have cooking up over at the Wrap.
I'm at therap.com. I'm at Twitter at Scott Mendelson. I am basically doing sort of macro film journalism. We're doing a lot of stories about how the overwhelming narrative of the earnings month that is about to end, with everyone getting their earnings released for the quarter, is that people are betting on theatrical again because they realize if they want revenue, they can't just turn into a streaming widget. And Lionsgate's had a good had a stock upswing because of the strength of its theatrical slate. Um, Disney is saying, hey, we're going to try to keep our animated movies off Disney Plus for a little bit longer. David Zaslav, whether he is good or evil, he's been at the forefront of saying, streaming cannot be the one size solution to everything. Theatrical is where it starts. Straight to streaming movies don't make anybody any money.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a shame that Batgirl was a casualty of that, but he's right.
Will
Break a few
Um,
eggs.
and
we ever
there's
see
no law
Batgirl,
saying.
Scott? Will we
I
ever see
doubt it.
it? Wow.
But I think it'd be the easiest thing in the world for Gunn and Safran just to call up Leslie Grace and say, "Hey, do you want to play Batgirl again and something else?"
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Well, very exciting. So follow Scott Mendelson on Twitter, but more importantly, read him over at The Wrap. Must read all the time.
oh, and I started doing on Tuesdays a Twitter Spaces with Jeremy Fuster, the actual box office reporter at The Wrap. Usually it's around Tuesdays around noonish, but depending on our schedule, it might be over under. But so
Very
yeah,
exciting. Oh, I've got to catch that one here. Anytime we get a chance to hear Scott Mendelson, you got to take that. You got to take that opportunity. So yeah, visit him
it's
over on
recorded
Twitter
in the work
Spaces.
office, so there's less vulgarity.
Right.
Nice. Okay.
So yeah, so Clayton, I think we've done it. Obviously, of course, email us at theboboyspodcast@gmail.com. Follow us on Twitter at theboboyspod. And watch us on YouTube as you're doing right now. Subscribe, smash that like button, smash it right down there, and do that. And and give us 5 stars on whatever podcast platform you're listening, but do it on Apple because that's the only one that really matters. And
Well,
that is it. And I think we've done it.
well, Pat, you also have another podcast,
And I
right?
do have another podcast. It's called the Show Me the Money. It's on the Sports Gambling Podcast Network. We are covering the race to the Academy Awards and the SAG Awards as of this recording just happened. So we'll be covering the SAG Awards and telling you who to gamble on for the upcoming Academy Awards, because it is, of course, a gambling based podcast that I co-host with Nick Turner.
Gambling problem? Call 1-877-8-HOPE-NY, 467-3669. That's 467-3669.
Yes. So call it
If
or
you want
don't
to.
if you
Or
want
don't.
to. All right. So
Yeah.
that is it.
All right. I
Okie
don't think
dokie. Well,
there's
thank you
anything.
very much.
Thank you. I don't think there's anything left to say, Scott, except for until next time.
Will
Smell
you
you
at
at
the
the
box
box
office.
office.
Nailed it.
Nailed it.